Councilmember Kitchen, do you want to make a motion?
I move passage of all three items.
Okay, we're going to consider all three items at the same time. Is there a second to that? Councilmember Ellis seconds the motion. We have some speakers to speak. Do you want to speak first, or should I go and start recognizing people?
Well, I don't want to speak first, but I do have some questions for staff.
Okay, you want to do that first, or after
Yeah,
speakers?
I think maybe
Okay.
if we could take, and the reason I want to take that first is because there was some additional backup provided, both by our interim homeless strategy officer and by our real estate office. And I think that the backup that they posted today may respond to at least some of the questions. So I just like to ask, I think I have 3 questions for them.
Go ahead.
Okay. My first question, I think, is maybe with regard to the acquisition timeline. So my understanding is that best case scenario is about a 60-day acquisition timeline. And then I'm also understanding that the ultimate price that the council, that the city might pay for something would be based on fair market value as well as negotiations. And so those are questions for you to confirm, and also if you could just briefly go over what the due diligence process is for acquisition.
Yes, Mayor and Council, Alex Gale, Interim Officer for the Office of Real Estate Services. Our typical due diligence is what we typically want to have done is a third-party appraisal of the property, lead and asbestos testing, environmental site assessment, as well as a property condition report. And so all 4 of those reports that we are having done on the property, we anticipate having those back by July 31st. If we can, depending on how those come back, we would want to, if we need to renegotiate something depending on what those reports come back as, we would hope the landowner would agree to that, and we would hopefully be able to close within 30 days of that, which would be basically by the end of August, within that time frame from between July 31st to the end of August to close on that property. And so, yes, that is what we do is we have a third-party appraisal completed on that property, which within the backup, we also talk about the difference between what that third-party appraisal is compared to what the Travis County Appraisal District's assessed value is, and what those differences are depending on the timing of when we do it. We also, when our appraisal consultant actually is able to go into the property and see what upgrades are done to that property to understand it, as well as when TCAT assesses the value, there are some possible exemptions that are taken into consideration for that assessed value. And then as well as whenever a landowner definitely has a financial motive to successfully try and lower what that assessed value is. And so that's what some of those differences are between what our fair market value may be compared to what the TCAT assessed value is.
Okay, thank you. And is it accurate to state that as a city, we don't pay more than fair market value, and that's one reason we do appraisals?
Correct.
Okay.
So for every property that we want to acquire, we have a third-party appraisal done to determine what that fair market value is, and so we want to make sure that we don't pay anything more than what is fair market value for the property.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 questions for our homeless strategy officer. And thank you. So, and this is also information that is in backup. Could you just speak to the process that you all went through? And, I don't know if that's you and real estate or whoever went through, that the staff went through for the process of searching for a property after the council voted to initiate this process on January 31st. So could you just speak to the process you all went through for searching a property?
Councilmember Veronica Briceño, I'm the interim homeless strategy officer. We did begin our process after passage of this resolution from council. It included not only working with the individuals in our own office, but also a team across the city, including individuals from our housing department, our health department, and our real estate office. In looking at properties, the resolution, as you recall, referred to looking at both city-owned land and properties that are on the market. We evaluated about 30 city-owned properties, as well as about 70 privately owned properties through this process. When we're vetting processes, we looked at the list of criteria that were outlined in that resolution, including not directly adjacent to a neighborhood, proximity to major corridors, access to public transportation, site and size acreage of the property, access to health care, access to case management and social service providers, and the current condition of the site, as well as any environmental considerations. So with that list of criteria, the majority of the properties were eliminated, and that's how we were able to move forward with this recommendation of the site that you're considering today.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question, if you could speak to it with regard to, and this is also in the backup, the community outreach process. And also, we've talked about the fact that this is in the backup, that one of the aspects of this item, of item 179, is to develop a legally binding restriction on the property. I'll speak to that more later because I do have some direction with regard to pursuing that legally binding restriction. But I know that you have in your backup some language about the process of community outreach. So could you speak to that?
Absolutely. We have been having discussions with our community engagement team here at the City of Austin on how we can work with not only the community at large, but also the immediate, the neighbors in the vicinity, the residents in the vicinity, as well as business owners in the vicinity, and in addition to our stakeholders that are working in this area of homelessness. We will, as we move forward with the item today, we will develop a plan so that we can receive input on how we as a city can be a good neighbor on this property. We want to take into account the concerns of the residents and the business owners in the immediate area.
Okay, thank you. I'll speak to my direction later, and that direction relates to the restrictions on the property and the process of working with the community to develop those restrictions. So thank you. That's all the questions I have right now.
So I'm going to call. The first speaker is going to be Ray Collins. Is Mr. Collins here? And then on deck will be Ellis Peterson. Is Ellis Peterson here? You'll be up at this podium. You have time donated by Sean Whalen. Is Sean Whalen here? Okay, so when you come up, Mr. Peterson, you'll have 5 minutes. Mr. Collins, you have 3 minutes. Yeah, you can go ahead.
May I have a slide, please? My name is Ray Collins. This is slide you're about to see is ECHO Executive Director Ann Howard's slide at 8:14 into her council work session briefing on February 13th, 2018. I bring it to you today to call your attention to Councilmember Kazar's remarks at the June 4th council work session to the effect that the capacity of the proposed housing-focused shelter on Ben White must balance facility funding and services funding. An imbalance of the two will not allow the shelter to operate within the NAEH guidelines Council has chosen. The proposed capacity is 50 to 100 beds. My interest is that the number of people actually in residence be frequently evaluated and adjusted to the NAEH guidelines, taking into account our present limitations on outflow and future improvement of same. I say to you that this is essential for success as portrayed in the slide, and that the success of this Ben White facility is essential to model future facilities around Austin. Slide off, please. Finally, I want to identify myself as one of the supporters of a housing-focused shelter who is interested in having the NAEH guidelines codified in a restrictive covenant. I can see we're thinking along the same lines, up to and including closure of the facility if the NAEH guidelines are not achieved. I'm going to be involved at some level in the restrictive covenant discussion simply because I know some of the people involved. And if council chooses, I would appreciate being involved as chair of the contact team in the budding area to the south. Finally, I hope council will acknowledge, as I do, that City Manager Cronk has accomplished an amazing feat. He's located a property literally a stone's throw from campers in the Greenbelt, near people living under Ben White, a little under 2 miles from Austin's most successful nonprofit for finding housing, on a Cap Metro route, and near health care. All this while successfully executing Council's direction that the property not be adjacent to a residential neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nizamzadeh will be up here. Introduce yourself, please. You have 3 minutes.
Sure. Evelio Estrada Caneda. Good afternoon, council members. I live 1.8 miles from the new transitional housing that's being proposed. I am just here to share that there are some of us in the community who are not threatened by this and do not fear it, and are, in fact, happy to welcome a place of transition where people can find a new life and a new way forward. I think there's a lot of confusion that people in the community have that this will become Arch 2.0. Those of us who've read through the material so graciously provided by much of the council understand that that's not the case. You can't walk in the front door here and get services. You need to be referred in, from what I understand. That makes a massive difference. No one has a need to camp out outside waiting for that. I know you're going to hear many voices today that are very worried about this. Many people who are going to say this was never zoned for this. This is too expensive. Well, Austin's a changing city with a growing homeless population. We see many of them under the bridges of Ben White. And this is a great way, I think, to address it. And there are people like myself who are eager to stand up, welcome it, and you may even see volunteering there and bringing our skills. So thank you for your care in this selection.
Thank you.